legislators for taking time from their busy schedules right now to come here and answer your questions, excuse me. And thank you guys so much for your public service too. Appreciate it so much. And another couple shout outs to Doug Taylor, our city councilman here.
Let's give him a round of applause.
Yes, he is going to be moderating tonight. And he is also from District 21. He's from 2108. We are going to have another shout out to Tyler Ricks. He is Mr. Social Media. He is killing it. He is from 2107. And then we also have Ashley and Craig in the back. They're from 2103 and 2105. Manning the desk. Thank you guys. Then let's see.
How about a shout out for Tiffany, our
It's my first time, so I hope you can extend a little grace. So thank you so much. And we do have an invocation and a pledge. We've got an invocation that's going to be done by Thad Butterworth. Yes.
If you would all bow your head and close your eyes. Lord, we just thank you for being placed in a country that is founded on freedom and founded on your principles. We thank you for the many great victories for conservative principles, for Republicans in this last election, Lord. And we thank you that so many things are changing for the better, Lord. We ask that you would just give us grace and wisdom tonight. I pray that you be with the legislators and help them to communicate clearly, Lord. And we pray that your grace and your blessing would be over this whole event. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right. And where's Steve? Oh, you're right there. I'm like, you blended. You're great. Steve is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh. You don't have to. It's okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Okay, and in case you haven't been to one of these before, we do have note cards right when you come in and some pens there. We would love to hear your questions. If you want to raise your hand, I will come grab your questions from you, and I will let Doug explain the rest.
Thanks, Tiffany. We'll appreciate everybody coming out tonight. So the way we'll try to do this, town halls are meant to be more educational, an opportunity to hear from the legislators, kind of what's happening right now, kind of expound on things maybe you've heard in the news about what's maybe happening down there, some of their priorities that they'd like to see addressed. So I have a few questions to get us started, to kind of get the things rolling along here as we get kind of dive into some of the issues. I've got a few questions that have already been submitted. The best thing to do is, like Tiffany said, there's some note cards in the back. Write your question down, raise your hand. We'll have some folks grab the question and bring them up here. I'll do my best to get to the questions. Also, though, if there's a few questions about the same topic, I'll probably just sort of group those together at one time instead of asking sort of the same version of a question. Also, I think it's important to note we want to make sure that we're not asking kind of gotcha questions or things that are, we can ask hard questions, I'm not saying that, but we want to avoid the gotcha questions because we want this to be more about just educating you about what's happening, kind of finding out what's happening with the legislature, kind of what they feel about certain things. So I think that's just good to know. We're going to do our best to keep the legislators kind of focused on us. We've got some time cards here we'll wave in front of you in case you're getting a little too long-winded on stuff. Some issues take a little more time to describe, so obviously I think we'll understand that, but we'll go ahead and get started. We have the microphone here. You guys can pass that back and forth. So I think the first question I'll ask, just to kind of get things started, and maybe we'll start with Representative Ehlers and just kind of work our way down this way. Just really quickly, if you could just let the audience know, how long have you been in the legislature and what are your current committees this year? Because they all changed just a month ago. So just a real quick intro would be great.
Thank you. Good to be here tonight. Good to see so many folks out tonight. It's great to have this sort of representation from our district. So I'm Jeff Ehlers, and this is my second term in the legislature. I'm currently on 4 committees, so I'm on the Revenue and Tax Committee, I'm on the Business Committee, the Agricultural Committee, and then I'm also chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And I've really enjoyed serving a first term. I learned a lot and hope to put what I've learned into good use in this second term.
Thank you, Representative. My name is Treg Brent. I represent, obviously, District 21 in the Idaho State Senate. This is also my second term. We were all elected newbies last 3 years ago. So grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to Tiffany and all the volunteers and the precinct committee men and women who are here who are supporting this cause. I really enjoy being at these forums. I love the discussion and the debate and informing you of what's happening down at the Capitol. The committees that I'm on, I basically have the same committees as last time. I got a new committee, which I have 3. I'm vice chair of state affairs. I'm on local government taxation, and then a new committee that I have this session, starting this session, is commerce and human resources. So I have some really good committees, and I'm excited that we've begun and where we're going to go.
Yeah, I would echo the thank you to everybody for being here, and especially to the volunteers and everybody for putting this together. My name is James Petzke, again, in my second term. I currently serve on appropriations, or better known JFAC. That's where most of my time goes. That's working on the state budget. And then I also have the Resources and Conservation Committee and the Transportation Committee.
All right, thank you. We will just keep the microphone here. Representative Petzke, in your opinion, as you enter this legislative session, what do you think the most important issues are that you would like to see the legislature take on and address in a meaningful way? And I think this is a good question for all 3, so maybe we'll just pass it back that way when you're done.
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's a ton of them, right? A ton of different issues that we're seeing. There's a lot of really important ones, honestly, that I'm really excited to dive into on the resources side, particularly with the change in the administration at the federal level. We're seeing a complete shift in our natural resource policy across the country, and that's going to have a big impact here in Idaho. Really excited about potential changes in how we manage grizzly bears, things like that. So that's one of those niche ones that I'm really excited about personally to be working on this session. Infrastructure investment is, of course, critical. We do again have a slight budgetary surplus and expected growth for next year. It's not huge like we've had in the past. In the last few years, not quite the same level of federal dollars flowing in that we've had, compared to prior years. But we do expect to see a little bit of an increase in revenue over the current fiscal year, and so because of that, we're going to hopefully do some tax relief. I think tax relief is top of mind for everybody in that building. Potentially some infrastructure investment. The governor also set aside some money for education in a few different ways. So there's a lot to unpack there, but excited to get to work on all of it for sure.
Great question. Along with what Representative Petzke mentioned regarding education choice and also transportation, some of the things that I'm excited to learn more about specific to transportation is TECM. Anytime that we get, with the growth that we're experiencing in Meridian, side effects of that are always infrastructure related. You can just drive down most of the thoroughfares in our city and you can see why. Along with that, with education, other than the choice aspect that I'm sure we'll converse a little bit about tonight, is continuing to invest in career technical education. I think it's extraordinarily important that we prepare our students for real-life application at graduation. I feel like the go-on rate needs to increase, and whether that is in our community colleges or universities, whatever the case may be, but our kiddos need to be more ready to perform after graduation than they are right now.
So there's a lot of big issues coming through, and one of the reasons I'm really excited to serve on the Revenue and Tax Committee, which I'm a CPA, so maybe that's why, but so many of these issues are coming through our committee. So we've already seen a bill for a huge income tax relief, $240 million. We have a bill up tomorrow for property tax relief. We have the school choice bill for $50 million for school choice that's coming through our committee. This morning we heard a grocery tax bill for $50 million come through. This TECM, the transportation bill also is coming through our committee. That could put somewhere between $600 million to $1 billion into transportation projects on top of what's already being spent for transportation. So that could have a real impact throughout our state. So I'm really excited about all of those big ticket items. You'll also soon hopefully get a chance here to talk about some of our bills we're working on personally. I'm working on some things basically to lower taxes and deregulate our state.
Representative Ehlers, I'll let you keep the microphone. Let's dig in just a little bit more on some of the tax proposals. Those, as Representative Petzke and Senator Brent both mentioned, big issues for the legislature to take on this year. I think a lot of people in this room are very supportive of tax relief in any form that we can get it. We've had the income tax bill, we've had the grocery tax one today, tomorrow's a property tax bill introduction, and we've had a school choice bill, which is a tax bill, which we'll get into the school choice and kind of how that is in just a minute. But could you just go another level deeper in what you've seen in those provisions? And then maybe what I'll do is we'll pass it down to our budget guy here to help us understand how are we going to pay for that.
Okay, so the income tax bill, without getting too much in the weeds, it's going to take, we're about, I think, 5.69% flat tax on income. We'll get it down to 5.4%. That's both for individuals and corporations. So a pretty big drop. It lowers us in terms of our tax rating compared to other states. The school choice bill is a tax credit. That's a refundable tax credit. And for those that are 300% or below the federal poverty level, it's an advancement. So one of the concerns is that people that maybe can't afford to go to a different school aren't going to be able to get it because they don't have the money up front. This gives them the money up front so they could use it to go spend on qualified education expenses. And then if there's any money left after that, there's a structure for how it flows through. Let's see. The property tax one we haven't seen yet, but what I'm told tomorrow, it's going to build on what we've done the last 2 years in the legislature with reducing property taxes. And that's this one's going to go to school facilities. And so it's going to take the same mechanisms we've built to help school districts pay for facilities, but not charge all of us higher property taxes. So it's going to be property tax relief, which hopefully you saw in your property tax bills this year. It's going to be the same sort of mechanism for property tax relief that we've done the last 2 years.
In the Senate, we're a little bit behind because any tax generating bill or tax bill starts in the House. And so we haven't seen any of these bills yet. One bill that we've spoke about in our majority caucus is the grocery tax situation. There's a lot of folks in our state that are wanting the grocery tax repealed. I guess personally, I'm a numbers guy. I'm a small business owner, and so my thought process has always been, to support whatever puts more money in your pockets. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Representative Ehlers, but I believe the bill is a bill that's going to increase your tax credit on groceries to $155 per person, with an opportunity if you keep your receipts and if you can provide to the tax commission that you have spent more than you can get. I believe it's a tax credit up to $250. And so that's the bill that's started in the House. We haven't received it in the Senate, but that gives you a good idea where the legislation is currently on the grocery tax.
Yeah, and then I'll touch on that budget side, because that is the important thing. Everybody loves to cut taxes, right? We all love to cut taxes. And I remember talking to Jason Monks when he was the chairman of the tax committee. He told me he had $500 million in tax cuts in his drawer at any given time, and I think that's probably totally true. That as the chairman of the tax committee, you would have to be really careful about how much you put in front of your committee, because everybody's always going to vote in favor of tax cut. But you do have to make sure that however much taxes we cut as a legislature, that we don't end up going in the red with our budget. So that's going to be the priority for us on JFAC, to make sure that whatever tax cuts that we can do so in a responsible way and not get ourselves into trouble with our budget. So the governor put aside $100 million specifically for tax relief in his recommended budget. We will most likely take a higher revenue number than what he projected because his revenue projection it was quite frankly just a very low projection. We think it was an unrealistically low projection, and so we expect a little bit higher of a revenue number. We also think that there's some other money that we can potentially take from some other spots within the budget to hopefully get a little bit more. We don't have all of this hammered out yet. I think it's gonna take a lot of negotiation over the next few weeks to get to that level. The total dollar number, I was just talking to the speaker about this just like an hour ago, somewhere between $300 and $400 million. It's a lot more than what the governor proposed, and so we do need to look at some of those other sources of potential funding for that. It's going to be an interesting. I think that'll be one of the most interesting things that we have to deal with this session is how do we balance all of these tax cuts with making sure that our budget stays fiscally sound for the long run.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
I just have one comment to make about the property tax cuts. Just to put things in perspective, Idaho per capita has, I think we're the third lowest. We have the third lowest property taxes in our state. We do a really good job, and not saying that we should be lower, because anytime that we can responsibly cut taxes, 100% favor of. But to put that in perspective, I just wanted to state that currently in our nation, Idaho ranks third lowest per capita in property tax.
Thank you. Representative Petzke, if you would, on that last point you were making, you were talking about trying to pass all the tax cuts in a responsible way. The governor highlighted about $100 million. The legislature is obviously looking at a much higher number. Would you mind just kind of going in a little bit about how JFAC sort of sets those revenue projections and kind of some of the back and forth between what the legislature thinks, the governor, just in terms of how we understand how these priorities can be sort of established? I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so basically the process that we go through, we have to set a expected revenue number. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's a guess, right? It's a projection for how much revenue the state of Idaho will bring in. And that number is, we're projecting as much as 18 months out, because we're predicting the next fiscal year, which starts 6 months from now. So it's a really hard thing to do because you never can predict the economy, right? Nobody can. And so the process that we've come up with is there's an economic outlook and review, economic outlook review assessment committee, a revenue assessment committee that a group of legislators, I believe it's about 20 of them, all come together. They listen to economic predictions from a bunch of experts, and then they each make their own prediction. And we essentially take roughly the average or the median of those projections is what typically happens. And then their median number goes to JFAC, and then JFAC has to adopt a revenue number. And that gives us essentially the total number of dollars that we can spend as a legislature for the year. So right now the Economic Outlook Committee has met. They've provided their recommendation. We had the revenue issue in front of JFAC 2 weeks ago. I made a motion that was in line with what the Economic Outlook Committee proposed, and unfortunately it passed 14-6, but per our rules we have to get support from more than half of the Senate as well as from the House, and we did not have that. So it's been a little bit of a struggle between the bodies, between the House and the Senate, to figure out exactly what our revenue number is going to be. We're fighting over about a $70 million difference right now. So we'll see. That is going to be a key driver, because obviously if we do take the higher revenue number, we can afford $70 million more. Whether that's in tax relief or in something else. So that's going to be a big determining factor of what we do this session.
Thank you. Senator Brent, this next question for you, since you touched on that in your opening comments about infrastructure. The question, could you talk about the infrastructure work you're doing to help alleviate traffic? And of course, those of us that live in Meridian feel it every day. So if you could talk a little bit about what you're working on to do that, and then Representative Ehlers or Petzke, if you want to answer that question, feel free.
Great question. Great question. I'm not personally on the Transportation Committee, and I don't have any current legislation regarding transportation. But what I can tell you is that certain projects like Highway 16, that is the new highway from Jim County to the freeway, is going to be a huge deal to our community. It's going to really alleviate. Who lives off of 10 Mile? Raise your hand. I mean, it's basically a freeway as we speak, and so I think that having Highway 16 is in place is certainly going to alleviate a lot of traffic issues. I think one thing that right now is in design review that the councilman can speak to as well is the overpass that's going to be at Linder. Currently, there's only one street that goes all the way from north to south. All right, that's Eagle Road, and the other one will be Linder. And so creating that avenue not only for commerce, but West Ada School District, who's busing kiddos, it's really going to be a huge deal to our community to have those projects in place. You know, one of the side effects of growth, which can be a good thing, but it also can be something that's sort of a stinger. Number one is infrastructure issues, and number two are jobs. So anytime the governor proposes expansion like Tecum or other projects for roads and bridges, I will always, I should say always, that's a tough, don't hold me to that. I just said always on politics. I can honestly say that I will strongly support any type of infrastructure investment in our state.
Yeah, I just want to harken back to what Representative Petzke was saying about the revenue target for a second. I got the opportunity to co-chair that Economic Revenue Committee, and I learned a lot about that process. And one, I'm grateful that we live in Idaho, that we have to have a balanced budget. You know, we have a cap. We can't go above that. And we've seen in Congress, you know, what's been happening at the federal level. And yeah, I'm grateful in Idaho. That's part of what that job is, to set the cap so we're not going above it. And now personally, I'd like to, you know, if we have extra revenue, use that for tax relief. You know, everybody has their own ideas about where that money should go. Regarding transportation, yeah, Highway 16, Linder, the Tecum funding to get some more money for our infrastructure, for our roads, I think could be a big deal. We're also thinking long-term. You know, there's been talk, and this is way down the road, but like a belt route south of the freeway. I think could do a lot to relieve the traffic, especially maybe the pass-through traffic, the truck traffic coming through the freeway system right now. If we could just kind of route that around. You look at some of the big western cities out here, Salt Lake, Las Vegas, they have these belt routes. And I think that's something we should consider long-term to help relieve some of the traffic stress going right through our freeway system right now.
Great, thank you. Here's an interesting question. I guess we'll all three of you take a quick shot, and maybe you've answered it already, but what bills are you most excited about this session? Could be your own bill, could be a different issue, but what are you most excited about?
Okay, I think we've talked about some of the big ticket ones that will make headlines in the news. I want to talk to you about a few that I'm working on. I'm working on about 20 bills. I'd hope to see at least half of them get through, I think is my goal this session. And it's all about lowering taxes and deregulation. So I have a bill to de-license 6 different licenses that I think are unnecessary. I learned this last year, but glamour shots require a license in Idaho. You can be a photographer and be unlicensed, but if you're taking a glamour shot, you got to be licensed. I thought that was a little weird. I'm not sure what the public safety interest is in glamour shots. There's a few like those. A makeup artist is one. I thought, do we really need to license that in Idaho? So I've got a bill to de-license about 6 of those. I've got another one working on some of these licensor boards. Have like 5 or 10 years worth of cash and that they're sitting on, but they're still charging you a fee, right, to get your license. And so, on the other hand, some are way in debt. So it's like, we got to figure out these boards and get a better plan for their cash management system, especially if they're charging, users a bunch of fees. I have another one that's very local, mostly to District 21, but it's regarding the West Ada Recreation District.
There you go.
So thanks, Senator. So right now, this district is actually sort of a zombie structure. It no longer has assets. It was started in the 70s, and they've given away to the city now. BAC has taken over the swimming pool and any parks that they own. So they have no ownership of assets on their books, but they're still charging us property taxes. And we're just basically paying for their accountant to do the books and the lawyer to be on retainer, I guess. So if I can just explain it. So to do it in the 70s, to get it started, there's a big barrier, which I agree. To start a taxing district, if we're going to tax people, let's make sure it's a barrier, it's what the people want. So you had to get 20% of the signatures of the registered voters in that district, and then you had to put it on the ballot, and the majority had to vote for it. So it was created in the 70s. That took about 1,000 signatures to get on. Now, if you think about the growth in Meridian, To get it off, you have to follow the same process. You have to get 20% of the signatures, and then it's got to go to a vote of the people. 20% of the signatures now, I just looked at the latest numbers, is around 19,000 voters. So that's a lot of work to get somebody to get 19,000 votes. So what this bill does is it proposes an easier off-ramp. And the first step is, instead of getting the signatures, if the majority of the board of directors of that district vote for it, then they can put it to the county commissioners to put on the ballot. So it's still going to the vote of the people, so you can't have some rogue board just dissolving districts left and right. Still got to be a majority vote of the people, but I think it'll be an easier way, and it'll help for us in this district lower our property taxes a little bit.
Well done, Representative. I got a question for you.
Okay.
So when we were talking about this, did you find out if the city still, or the western, that tax index still owns that one little parcel?
It does not, as of September 30th, it has no ownership in any assets.
Wow, that's good news. We've been trying to do this for a long time. Well done. I'm working on a handful of bills. One of the bills that Representative Petzke and I have been working on together for the past year is a distraction-free cell phone in schools policy bill. We both were invited to, I guess you would call it like a symposium at Boise State University. I forgot they have a policy center. I forgot the name of it at Boise State, and they invited us to dinner, and we were able to meet a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jonathan Haidt, and he has he's authored many books, but the most recent one is the Anxious Generation, and it really focuses on how he believes our kiddos have been rewired from back in the day when we were all young, playing out in the yard and doing fun stuff, to just sitting on our cell phones all day long, watching reels and communicating via apps with other kiddos. And it's really, and he provides a lot of evidence, and he provides a lot of data that suggests that a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the suicide rate, and many other issues that we're experiencing in society is directly related to cell phones. When's the last time that we don't have kiddos anymore? My wife and I at home, they're all graduating off to college. But if you have young kiddos in your house, when was the last time you sat as a family around dinner and just conversed about different stuff, whether it was what you did that day or whatever? In my opinion, I don't think that happens as much. And so Representative Petzke and I introduced the bill this afternoon in Senate Ed. But basically what it does is it mandates that every school district in the state has to have some type of a policy. Now, I come from local government, all right? And so when I was on city council, I hated it when the state government, the federal government told us how to do whatever they came, or they thought they knew more about the end result more than I did. And so what we're doing is we're leaving it up to local control to decide as school districts what the best policy is for each individual school district. West Ada is doing a phenomenal job. They have a bell-to-bell policy for elementary, bell-to-bell policy for middle school, and they've done a really good job in high school. In fact, James and I went and visited Meridian High School about this past fall. I need more than 30 seconds. You gave him 5 minutes. And it was amazing. It was amazing, the results. There was this one girl, and she's a senior, she's about ready to graduate. She's co-student by president, and she now, getting off her phone, knows the names of all of her friends in her grade, and she's about ready to graduate. So really excited about this bill and what it's going to do to help our youngsters really be stress-free, anxiety-free from from their cell phones.
Yeah, and I'll second that. The cell phones in schools bill that we've got that Senator Brent introduced today, it's certainly something I'm really excited about. It's very much a needed thing. And I think that we came up with a really cool approach to it too, where we're saying that every district needs to tackle this issue, and we're spelling out exactly why it's a problem, but we're not mandating a specific solution. We're saying, hey, go figure out the solution that works for you and your school district, because the rural school districts are very different than the West Adas of the world, right? And so giving a little, I think, is a really good thing that was created by state board policy. It's not even a law. that essentially gives more money to our higher education institutions based on how many students and how many classes are being taken. Which, if you think about it a little bit, that creates kind of a backwards incentive, because it incentivizes universities and colleges to keep kids in school rather than get them completed and out into the workforce. Exact opposite of what we want. And so what we're going to try to do is come up with some kind of outcomes-based funding formula for higher education that rewards our institutions for doing things like shrinking their graduation, their time to graduation, right? Like if they're getting students out the door quicker so that they can actually get into the workforce, take on less student loans. Or increase their rate of freshman retention, right? Like how many students are coming back in for year 2, not just doing year 1 and dropping out. So coming up with a more outcomes-based way to fund higher education, I think would be a really good win for the state. So that's more.
Great. All right. Thank you. We'll stay on the topic of education. I've got 2 or 3 questions up here about school choice. It was brought up. The governor set aside $50 million for a school choice proposal. He wasn't specific about what he wanted it to look like. He basically wants the legislature to weigh in on what that policy should be. Representative Ehlers mentioned in his opening a refundable tax credit bill that was about $50 million. So if you could, and there's been a few bills put forward, there might be some more later. It's a big issue. It's dominated Republican politics for the last few years especially. Tell us what you're looking for in a school choice bill. What are some things that are really important to you, and kind of what your position is on the issue?
Yeah, great question. It's going to be a really big topic this session, of course, because the governor did put a little bit of money aside for it in his budget. I've personally never been a huge fan of this idea because to me, it honestly, it just looks a little bit like a government handout. So it's not my favorite thing that we're going down this path. But I do understand the potential value of it, and especially with some of the new constraints that have come around. In prior iterations of this discussion the last few years, there's been a lot more holes to me in the bills that have been proposed. And so far we've got, I think 3 bills are out. One of them is just a personal bill, it's not going anywhere. But then there's a House bill, that's the tax bill that was mentioned already. And then there's a Senate bill that builds on the Empowering Parents program. Normally I'm all about being Team House, but I think on this issue I definitely prefer the Senate version for a couple of reasons. For one thing, it includes pre-K as a potential thing that can be included in the school choice bill. That has the potential to solve some of our child care crisis issue that we've got going on in the state. So I think that could potentially serve as a really cool multi-solution thing that could come out of the school choice legislation. Excuse me. The other thing about the Senate bill that I like, it has a little bit more accountability, and that's something that the government, the governor specifically cited as, has to be in the bill in some way, shape, or form. The House bill doesn't even require that the teachers at the schools that the money is going to are background checked. And to me, that's a non-starter. If we're going to be giving government funds to private schools, there absolutely needs to be some accountability and some safety measures in place to make sure that we're using that money wisely. Like I said, it's not my favorite thing, not my favorite issue. But if we are going to go down that road, I do want to make sure that there's some accountability and some transparency, and potentially look at the pre-K thing as well, because I think that's a really cool add-on.
Great question. I think that what the governor called it was the Idaho way. And there are certain things that he put in the state of the state that I completely agree with. Some of the things James touched on as well. First is accountability. I think it's huge. I think that if we are going to be writing out checks or doing tax credit to families, I believe that there needs to be some type of accountability involved with it. Number 2, means testing. I think that we need to make sure that that only rich people and those who are of means are able to take advantage of this tax credit. I don't want to see what's happened in other states regarding budget busters, seeing these choice bills balloon into hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. In the state of Arizona, it's above $1 billion. I don't know all the specifics, but I think it's something that we really need to look at. I think that we need to remember that we're a rural state. We got to make sure that our rural communities and those schools are taken care of as well. But last but not least, we have a constitutional obligation, whether you like it or not, that we need to fund in a fair way public education. So we have to make sure that public education is taken care of as well. Now, there's a discussion of what that looks like. There's a big debate whether or not we're doing a good job with that. That's a conversation for another day. But those are some of the things I'm looking for in a school choice bill.
So some things that I like about this bill that's before our committee, which is the refundable tax credit. It answers a lot of things for me. And one, I think well, let me back up. I believe in doing what's best for the student. I think that's why education exists and what we should do. We do have a constitutional mandate for a uniform public education system, and I believe we can do both. We can have schools, public schools that work well for the vast majority of students, and for those that don't, we can have school choice. And this tax credit bill does that for me. It's also not taking away from the public school. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. It's not drawing $50 million out of the public schools and putting it in a school choice bucket. That is left untouched. It's a completely separate fund, a completely separate bucket of money. So it's not drawing away from our schools. I know that's a big concern for a lot of people. Another part I like about it, it's not a budget buster. It's capped at $50 million. It's $5,000 per student that qualifies, or up to $5,000, I should say. You don't get it if you don't actually spend it on education expenses. And it's $7,500 for special needs students. That's one of the concerns people have had, is how will this help special needs? Maybe it's more costly to help them, so they get a little bit more money for special needs students. It provides a list, so it goes to the state tax commission, and they will track how many people are applying for it, so we can see how big of a demand there might be for this, and then we can come as a legislature and reevaluate it again in future sessions. And in terms of the accountability, what I really like is this money goes directly to the parents, to the taxpayers, and they provide the form of accountability. If they don't like the school, if they don't like where they're going, they're going to leave, and their money is going to go with them. And so if they're not getting the outcomes that they want out of those schools, then I think the parents who know their children best are going to provide the best accountability mechanism.
Thank you. And I think you can tell by the variety of the answers, this is a big issue that certainly all three up here are going to be dealing with pretty much daily until this issue has been resolved in one way or the other. So there's quite a bit to it and quite a bit to unpack. Let's kind of move on to a little bit of a different issue. What are some of the ways you think we should rein in the ballot initiative process? And I know Representative Petzke, you addressed this issue last year. There was a new bill proposed this year by Representative Skog that was just introduced in the House, raising the threshold to 60%. I think there's a lot of different ideas about how to do that, but I think as a party, there's been a general agreement that what we saw with Proposition 1, all this out-of-state money that came in, how it was misconstrued as to what the initiative was. What are some of your thoughts after having going through this year? What are some of the conversations you're having with some of your colleagues about this? And what would you like to see, if any, done to reform the ballot initiative process in Idaho?
So there's a lot of good ideas out there. I can't say I'm necessarily settled on one, but one of them is raising the voter threshold, so it has to, kind of like bonds, has to pass with more of a supermajority if it gets on the ballot. I think there's more we could do to tighten up the signature gathering process to be a lot more transparent around that. I think there's also concerns about, is it too easy just to go to our big metro centers like Boise, Nampa here and collect signatures, and what about the rest of the state? And so I think there should be some things around how do we make sure this is what the whole state wants, because it's going to involve the state. Another related component to this is the spending by outside interest groups, and you saw that on Prop 1, that are coming from out of state and just spending a lot of money because, in their words, Idaho is cheap. It's cheap to come here and buy votes for them, essentially, and advertise in our state and hitting us with marketing and mailers and TV ads. And so I think we should be really cautious and concerned about who's coming from outside of our state, don't even live here, and are trying to influence what our state looks like. And so I know there are proposals in the works. I haven't seen them, but just giving us more transparency so we, the voters, know who that is, who are behind these ad campaigns, who's spending, millions of dollars were spent in the last election from out of state on these types of issues, just so we can know who the messenger is that's trying to change our state.
I think I supported the ballot initiative from last year or the year before. I think it was Senator Okonowitz's bill from up north. I think that his bill sort of addressed getting signatures from every county across the state, not necessarily focusing on big metropolitan areas. I think I can get behind that. I don't know if I support a number being talked about right now is 60%. I think we've got to be really careful when we take away the right of a citizen to act when they feel like their legislators are ignoring them. I think that it's a real slippery slope. And I think that as legislators, sometimes we legislate based upon what currently is happening or just happened, as opposed to looking, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now. I worry that as conservatives, what happens when or if potentially we're not able to use this initiative process for things that we believe strongly in, and we have to hit that 60% threshold or that supermajority, and the things that we're fighting for are harder to get because we passed a stupid law back in 2025. So we got to be really, really careful about how we legislate and how we approach this. I agree. If you're a conservative, you were against Prop 1. It wasn't, and I get all the reasons why, but we got to be careful about what that looks like going forward and how that might stifle that process that currently is in our Constitution that really makes it so that the citizens have a voice when their legislature isn't listening. That's a big deal and something that I take extremely serious.
Yeah, I would agree. The citizen initiative process is absolutely the people's check on us, right? Like to make sure that we're not doing something that gets completely afoul of what the people want us to do. So I don't necessarily want to make the process harder. I do want to make the process more transparent and especially react a little bit to what we've seen in recent years. So the bill that I brought last year, and I'll give...
Was it Valerie's?
It was Valerie. Where is Valerie? She's here. We get all embarrassed. We'll give her a shout out. It's a great bill. And basically what the bill does is it makes it so that signature gatherers have to turn in their signatures every month instead of just all at once at the end. And then it creates a review process where if somebody has changed their mind and they no longer support the ballot initiative, they can remove their signature from that list. And so why this is important is because if we look at the last two ballot initiatives that we've had that have gotten on the ballot, first you had the one that was the education funding one, but it was also a massive income tax hike. And when they went around selling it to people and getting signatures for it, they sold it as this is an education funding thing. They left out the part about it's a massive income tax hike. And then you had the one last year that was, hey, this is about open primaries, but when you dug in a little further, it was really ranked choice voting. And so you had a lot of people in both of these cases that signed on to the petition initially, but then they changed their mind when they learned a little bit more about it. And so what I think that we need to do is create this process that's a little bit more transparent and allows people to, essentially give people an option to remove their names after they've signed, and create some more accountability on the signature gatherers to make sure it's being done in a very honest way. Because this group that's been running these petitions, I think they've been a little bit misleading a few times with the petitions that they've brought and how they've sold them.
All right, thank you. This is a question for Representative Ehlers. I'm going to ask you to kind of dig into your role as chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Some questions wanting to understand what's the issue with the legislature pay raise, and kind of could you just give us some background on the process and kind of where things stand today?
All right, see if we can do this because there's a lot wrapped up into this. So, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. So first, let's start with the Constitution. The Constitution of Idaho says that the legislature can't set our own pay, and we can't vote for pay raises. We can't give ourselves an increase in pay. That's unconstitutional. It establishes a citizens committee on compensation made up of, I think, 3 appointees from the governor, 3 from the judicial, I think 3 just independent citizens, if I think that's right. They're the ones that meet and they establish the rate of pay for the upcoming legislative session. So they established a rate of pay for this session. Now, I think there's also a little misconception that we're not Congress, and I know Congress can vote themselves, and they did, a very significant pay raise. So we can't do that. The Constitution says we can meet as a legislature and decide to reject that. It says reject or reduce. But then the legislature a few decades ago actually passed a law even further restricting it, Statute 67-406B, I believe, that says, no, we can just reject it. That we can't, it doesn't say anything about reducing it. So, also, I think it's important to put the record out there, what we actually get paid, because I'm not sure what you think that we get paid, but it's set by this committee. It was just over $19,000 per year, set by the last in the last session. So this proposal was to get it up to $25,000. That's spread out over the course of 12 months. So nobody that I know in the legislature is getting rich off that. So there's some different proposals out there to try to do something about that. You may have heard that, you may have seen some of those things. I think there's a lot of misleading information out there. Let's see, I'm trying to think of anything else I'm missing on setting the table here about it. So there's a few different attempts to try to reduce, which the House personally felt it was against statute 67-406B, so we didn't go that route. There's another thing that we did pass you can donate it, your raise if you feel, or all your compensation for that matter, back to tax relief if you feel you're overcompensated. So there's been a couple different ways to try to address that. Nothing's really gone through yet.
Yeah, I think that's good enough. We only have about 10 minutes left, so let's get to another question. I have a question about immigration enforcement. So obviously immigration is a federal issue, but I think with the new administration, with President Trump, it's obviously a porous border. There's been a lot of issues we're concerned about. The question would be, how is the current immigration enforcement affecting our state, and how do you think we should respond to kind of any efforts on immigration enforcement, specific to Idaho? So.
Thanks a lot, guys, for making me start on this one.
Give it a try.
I think that we all can agree that the southern border, especially in the last 4 years, has been an absolute disaster. I think that there's not a single person in this room that can really, I don't think would ever disagree with that. I support President Trump's view on the southern border, what he's doing. I will say this. I think that if you are here illegally and you are you're a criminal or you're doing illegal acts, I think that you should be deported and sent back from wherever you came from. On the other side, if you are here and you're contributing to society and you are taking in, or you're giving, what should I say? If you are making money and you're not taking from the government, you're bringing in more than what you're taking. That's what I wanted to say. You've assimilated to your society. You're a good community member. You're engaged in all things that are good. I think that we got to honestly figure out a way that we can keep these people here legally. And I don't think that means amnesty. But I mean, if you look at the dairy industry in this state, it's the third largest dairy producing state in the nation. I think about 80% of their workforce is foreign born, undocumented. If you are a farmer, you can participate in the H-2A program, and you can have those who are not citizens working on your farm, and you can do it legally. We need to do the same thing for the dairy farmers. They need to be able to have a program that they can take advantage of federally, legally, where they can have foreign-born, non-citizen folks come work on their dairy farms in a way that benefits our economy. And until they're in, and so I support the federal government. I've called on our federal delegation last year in a memorial saying, get your crap together, guys, and figure this out, because these people are good, hardworking people, and they contribute to society, and they're arguably some of the most hardest working folks in agriculture. So we got to be careful and create a policy that benefits those and helps out and doesn't forget about our dairy industry.
Yeah, this one's it's a tough issue for us to tackle because we're actually pretty limited in what we can do on it, right? The Constitution and current federal law states that this is a federal issue that the state has very limited jurisdiction over. I do anticipate that things are going to get a lot better on this front because of obviously the change in the federal administration. The Trump administration is very clear about their intentions on this particular issue, and so I do anticipate things will get a lot better on this front over the next 4 years than they've been in the last 4 years. We also did, we have a bill on the House side so far that is modeled after the Texas 4 bill. If any of you are familiar with that, it essentially, it's unconstitutional under current law, and basically what it says is the state can enforce immigration laws, but Texas is using it as a way to challenge that current precedent that's set by the Supreme Court. And I know there's a desire by a lot in our legislature to pass a similar law so that if Texas's bill is ruled constitutional, ours would also go into effect. I'm not sure if that, if we're going to see that. I would assume that we will see that bill at some point, and it's a valid conversation to have given the circumstances. But as of right now, we are very limited in our roles that we can do from the state level. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that the federal government is about to really step things up with how they handle this issue.
I'll just add a little bit more. We do have a new administration that seems to take this problem more serious, and I think our governor and I think has signaled a willingness to work with the new administration to help on this issue particularly. And so I think in the state of Idaho, I think that's one of the things that we can do is assist with the administration's efforts, particularly law enforcement. One of the reasons it can be a concern to Idaho is when you get these people that come here that are using up our services, maybe it's medical or whatnot, but aren't full paying tax citizens, I guess. They'll probably pay it on sales tax, but maybe not income tax or property tax or some of these other taxes that we're facing. And so I think that can create an inequality that can be concerning. So I think that's something to look at. I think the immigration, I guess, broader issue, like on work visas, like we're talking about here. If some of those are outmodeled and outdated, then let's look and work at what works for our economy now. And I think that's at the federal level, but let's have that conversation then if what needs to be reformed and revised as part of a broader immigration reform, including protecting our border.
We just have a few minutes before we want to wrap up. We're going to go to 7:30. It's about 7:25. So I'm going to ask, there's a few questions that weren't answered, one of which was related to House Joint Memorial today. That's kind of an odd issue, or not odd, a unique vehicle where it's a House Joint Memorial. Senator Treg, I don't even know if you had a chance to look at it yet since it's just been on the House side. But I think what I want to ask, the question here to kind of wrap up some of these that we have as stragglers here. Really, what are you looking to do to help protect Idaho's rights from the federal government, sort of that state sovereignty and where you see the federal government? Obviously a new administration, so there's maybe a new host of things that we really like, there may be some things that we don't like. So I'd like to just to kind of talk about that a little bit. And if someone wants to kind of explain House Joint Memorial, what that vote was about today. I mean, Treg, you mentioned last year a joint memorial on immigration. It's a way in which you send a message to the federal government of what you would like them to do. So it's, by passing it doesn't actually enact anything in Idaho code, but I think there's some value in just an explanation of what that House Joint Memorial vote was today. If someone wants to just kind of explain that. And then again, where do you see your role in sort of protecting Idaho's rights from the federal government?
Yeah, I'll take so one of the biggest things that I'm excited about in terms of protecting Idaho's rights from the federal government is many role in the Resources Committee, and particularly around grizzly bears, because Idaho is currently essentially not able to manage our grizzly bear population. It's something that we should be able to manage. We should be able to manage those animals to minimize conflict with humans and to minimize conflict with livestock and make sure the populations are kept in check. That's something that we've been trying to work towards for a very long time, but the federal government has continually kept them on the endangered species list without justification. I do think that the new administration is going to be much more willing to work with us on that, but I know that we're going to see a lot of things in the Resources Committee, particularly related to and we even saw one today that was related to it, related to getting our grizzly bears back under our jurisdiction. Also related to that is the wolf issue, because we're currently unable to do wolf trapping in the state because of a ruling related to grizzly bears getting accidentally trapped, which has never happened. But so hopefully we're going to be able to push back against the federal government on some of these issues, something I'm really excited about. As far as the joint memorial today, it's essentially a letter that was sent out. The thing that I took issue with that personally, one of several things. The main one, though, was that the wording in there was that Idaho is rejecting a Supreme Court decision. That's not something that the state can do. The Supreme Court sets the law of the land in that case, and when they make those rulings, they've set that. We cannot, as a state, reject a Supreme Court ruling. It's just not an option. And so to say that we can, not a thing that I was okay with or comfortable with, and so that's why I voted no on that.
What was the joint memorial about? Okay. Yeah, I need to look into that a little bit more. I'm not quite familiar with it, but when I get home, I'll take a look at that memorial. I think that there's a reason why we have federalism in our nation. There's a distinct separation of powers from local government, from state government, from the federal government. I think that the more power we give to the federal government, the less we are as a state. And any time that we can take back what is ours and to keep Idaho sovereign is something that I support. And I will look at this memorial that was debated earlier today. I'm not familiar with it.
Just adding a little bit to that memorial. So it didn't change the law. There's a lot of things out there, people getting worked up. It didn't change the definition of marriage. It didn't change the law. It had no legal binding effect to the laws of Idaho. It basically just asked the Supreme Court to reconsider their cases around marriage, which they did for Roe v. Wade on the abortion issue, and return that back to the states for the decision-making power. And it's just asking the Supreme Court, the federal government, kind of a pushback on it, hey, return this decision back to the states. And that's one of the ways, Idaho is looking also to push back and have state sovereignty. Another one I think is on our lands, and I've heard talk about maybe the administration's more friendly to letting us manage more of our land that's federally owned or that's part of the BLM, including our wildfires. I mean, we all experienced that this summer, or if you traveled anywhere across the state, you experienced it. And I heard some really horror stories of our state does a great job on state-controlled lands, but the federal government just basically telling everybody, stand down, don't do anything, and we're going to let it burn. And that is just frustrating. And that is something I don't think we want. We don't want the federal government telling us how to do our fires. I mean, we don't want to see what happened in California happen to us here. And so I think there's a lot of conversations now with the new administration about how we can actually let us manage our wildfires. I think that's just one example of what we can do, is that as a state, we should set the example for the rest of the nation on how we manage our state. And so we can tell the federal government, like, back off, leave us to ourselves. We know how to manage Idaho. You don't need to get involved because we're going to do a good job here. And so that's one of the things that I think we're working on.
We're out of time, so if each of you just want to take a couple minutes, excuse me, and just sort of some closing comments, just kind of wrap it up, and then we'll be done. So Representative Ehlers, why don't you start?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you all for being here, for everybody that helped put this on. Appreciate all the work that goes into just helping a citizen legislator function and be active, right? Like, that's us. We live in the community. We have other jobs outside of this. We have families. We live here, and so it's an honor to represent all of you down at the State House. If you didn't get your question answered, let's talk. Please continue to stay involved. Share your ideas. That's what makes our state great, is that we're a small community. We get to know each other. We get to hear from each other. We get to talk and interact, which I really appreciate. So that's something I'd say. If you have questions, if you hear something about there out on the internet, if you get crazy text messages, right? Just remember what Abraham Lincoln said. I read it on the internet. He said, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet." Anyways, thank you for being here tonight, and let's stay in touch.
Wait a minute, Abraham Lincoln.
He said it. It's on the internet.
That's pretty fast. I just wanted to say thank you so much, District 21, for all you do. I talk with other legislators across the state, and I speak with engaged citizens across the state, and District 21 does right. And I truly believe that. You guys care, you guys are engaged in community. You show up on a Monday night, when you have other things going on with your families because you want to know what's going on. And I think that's a big deal. One thing that you need to know about me is that I'm always available. So if there's anything that I can do to help you, if there's anything that I can do to, as your legislator, as your senator that represents this district, I'm an easy guy to get a hold of, and I will do my best to make sure that you're taken care of. God bless you, and thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. It is a true pleasure to serve District 21, especially because we do have such a great district, and you guys show up to these events. They're always full. It's fantastic to see you all here, and I really appreciate that. And I'm also very available. Our contact info for all of us is very public. You can get a hold of us very easily, so never hesitate to reach out. Happy to chat anytime, and especially during the session, help talk about what's going on. And yeah, thanks so much for being here, and especially thanks to our volunteers who put together.
So before I got here, my social media gal says I need a picture. I want to make sure that you're really doing what you're saying you're going to do on social media. You mind if we can take a little selfie? I'll just stand up and take a selfie of the crowd. Is that a big deal? Okay, you can make some exactly. So you can do what you want. Just smile real big. You can flip me off, whatever you want. I'm going to put it down. I'll take a little selfie.
Okay, guys, ready?
No obscene gestures. Well, maybe a couple.
You ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. I'll just speak on behalf of the District 21 Republicans. We really appreciate your time. I can attest from my profession, I'm with these guys quite a bit. I can tell you they work hard, they work long hours. I give them a lot of stuff to think about, so I can only imagine the amount of people and the amount of work. So we do really, really appreciate that. You got your hand up?
I just want to say that if anybody wants to follow bills, they can go online to legislature.idaho.gov, and you can create your own bill tracker, and you can check a little box, and whenever anything happens on the bill, they'll send you a message and let you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that website, you can also see the calendars when they're having the hearings, and you can watch them online.
Yeah, so.
And for District 21 in particular, anytime that these guys introduce a bill that they did, will be published to our social media channels. Have you guys been noticing this session? And votes too for a recap for the social medias. Yeah, it's the @ IDGOP21 across all the social media, so Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So.
Yeah, I think transparency is really important in government. I'm really grateful for our 3 legislators. They're very transparent. They're very available. I can speak personally to that. I think they're great in terms of how they try to connect with you. Appreciate you spending some time tonight. And just for everyone, the legislature's just barely getting warmed up. We're just starting to see a lot of stuff happening now. So they had a lot to talk about. Imagine if you did this in 2 months, they're going to have a whole lot to talk about. But I'm not promising anything down the road. So thank you and good night.